I want to thank everybody for joining us for this Latinos in the Deep South webinar series, exploring the impact of HIV on Latinos in the South, using the interactive online tool AIDSVu. I want for a couple of housekeeping. My name is Eric Valera, and I am the Program Director for Latinos in the Deep South. Also, Judith Montenegro, who is the Program Director for Community Organizing in Latinos in the Deep South. We base this program out of North Carolina, and it's a program of the Latino Commission on AIDS. I hope everybody is warm wherever you are and that you have a warm beverage next to you and a notepad for a really wonderful presentation that we're looking forward to. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. As I mentioned, we have a lot of people on the line. I ask if we could, and we're going to keep the lines muted. If you have any questions, at any point, please send them during our chat feature. If you have any questions for our guest presenter, you can ask them through the feature, and we'll have a segment towards the end where we will be asking questions directly in regard to the presentation itself. So a little bit about Latinos in the Deep South. Latinos in the Deep South originated in 2007 from a program of the Latino Commission on AIDS with an assessment of southern states that had emerging Latino populations. The assessment had given birth to this as a program and a community mobilizing program to be able to help mobilize the emerging Latino community and to be able to respond to the health disparities of this community. So we use the LUCA principle as our guiding community mobilization model, and we aim to strengthen the infrastructure and provide support for those who are working with Latinos in the South, as well as be able to help provide a voice for those who are part of this emerging population. So today we are going to be talking about AIDSVu. AIDSVu is an amazing tool that all of us need to learn about if we don't already. And we have with us Travis Sanchez. Dr. Sanchez has 12 years of experience in infectious disease and epidemiology, including HIV epidemiology and prevention in men who have sex with men in the United States, and as well as in international settings. He has experience in local, state, and federal public health systems. He's worked in the science in the Division of HIV/AIDS Prevention and a branch chief for the CDC South Africa program. He has experience in design and scientific oversight of numerous HIV behavioral and clinical research projects, as well as clinical trials, having served as the Associate Chief for Science of the CDC branch, responsible for several clinical trials and trials of the safety and efficacy of HIV pre-exposure prophylactics and use of earlier initiations of antiretroviral therapies as a means to prevent HIV transmission. He previously led a study of risk behaviors and HIV prevalence among a community of LGBT youth involved in the New York City house ball community. He is currently a co-investigator of an NIH-supported research grant to identify the factors that result in the higher HIV acquisition risk of Black MSM compared to white MSM. A CDC contractor to collect more than 40,000 surveys from MSM online over 2 years, and another CDC contract to conduct a nationwide campaign to make an HIV diagnosis among 3,000 MSM, including those 13 to 17 years old, 17 years of age in the States. He is currently conducting a qualitative research with MSM 13 to 17 years old in of age in Atlanta to identify themes related to improving their participation in future HIV and STD research studies. Dr. Sanchez is the program director for AIDSVu and HIV Continuum, an exciting new project that is coming out of Emory University as well. Dr. Sanchez, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much for that introduction. What we're going to do today is we're going to just present some overview slides for AIDSVu, which is this project to have new ways of visualizing the HIV epidemic in the United States. Also, just as background, the reason why we created this site and sort of the background for both the lead scientist on the project, Dr. Patrick Sullivan, and myself, is we both had about 10 years of experience working at the CDC and HIV surveillance, also working on this type of data. And what we really saw as the need existing out there was a way to take sort of this complex tables, those very dense surveillance tables, and turn them into information that would actually be much more easily accessible, both to people that work in the policy arena, but also healthcare providers and people in the general public. And so out of that was created this site called AIDSVu. So we go to the next slide. So AIDSVu is this compilation of mostly maps, which sort of allow the users to visually explore the HIV epidemic and sort of look at these side by side with other critical pieces of the epidemic, such as resources, HIV testing, and treatment locations. And we wanted to do this in a way that sort of took that prevalence data and really made it accessible to people and made it relevant to sort of the policy areas that they were working in their local areas, or, like I said, for care and prevention. And really we did this from a perspective of trying to provide users with something that was intuitive and also something they were familiar with, so a typical mapping tool that everyone's become familiar with using online, and trying to take very complex data and distill it down into a format that people were familiar with and could be useful for informing or giving us information about these different levels of HIV disease in the U.S. Next slide. So AIDSVu uses data from multiple trusted sources. I mean, this is the other critical piece of AIDSVu, which was to be sure that whatever data we were putting out there was really from the most trusted sources. So in order, and then in addition to being a trusted source, we also wanted to be sure that data was comparable everywhere. There was a lot of states that produced their own data, both for their counties as well as for their cities. But the difficulty is that there wasn't sort of this uniform structure for how data was dealt with across the entire nation in a mapping process. But CDC actually has all of that data at the state level and produces that and has produced that for years in maps. But when we took it to this next level, which was county, and really from this level is where we get this additional richness of understanding about the HIV epidemic. So the county level data, which the example, the map that you see here, actually comes directly from the Centers for Disease Control. But we also have data that come directly from the state and city health departments for 20, right now we're at 20 cities, and we'll show you the list of cities in a moment. In addition, we also have data that maps the social determinants of health, such as poverty, lack of health insurance, educational attainment, and does this side by side with the HIV prevalence maps. And then we also have other data that is pertinent, like transmission, the mode of HIV transmission, and then we had also mentioned these services. So we have data from trusted sources on HIV testing and treatment locations, as well as clinical trial sites that we can map and overlay with the prevalence data. Right. Next slide. So in addition to that detailed sort of data, that mosaic that we get from the mapping, we also find that it easier to put all the resources that we need into one place. And another way that we do this is by having state profiles. So again, this information is available on multiple places for CDC and state health departments, but we thought if we put all the tools into one place, that it would make them more useful for people. And so the state profile is an example of how we can provide sort of summary data state by state. And this year we'll also be adding profiles for the cities that are engaged in AIDSVu. And so we'll show you some examples when we take the tour of the site. Next slide. As I mentioned, there are also additional features of AIDSVu, again, putting collections of resources together that make sense. So we have an HIV testing site locator that information is a direct feed that comes from the National Prevention Information Network at CDC. People can either zoom down based on zip code or can actually turn on the locator on top of the maps that they're already looking at. The same thing with the treatment locator as far as the functionality, and that data comes from a direct download from HRSA. And also we have these other resources that allow the users to get the data for free that we have on the site, either in slide format or in a lot of cases you can actually get the raw data that generated all of these things that we have up on the site. All right, next slide. So in addition, as we mentioned, sort of putting all the resources together in one place, you can imagine if you, we'll show you when you look at AIDSVu site, it can be a little overwhelming. But in addition to all of that information that we have out there that people can do the deeper dive on, we've also had a lot of success in providing summary data that collect information from a bunch of different sources on the different awareness days. And this is the example of the most recent one that we have that was put out on the National Latino AIDS Awareness Day. So again, it's taking that information that we have on AIDSVu and other sites and distilling it down into information that we think is important for the particular awareness days. And so we'll show you where sort of all those exist. And I can say that the National Latino AIDS Awareness Day was the first one that we did in 2012, so it was a very important one for us. All right, next. The other piece of the concept around AIDSVu is also the support that we provide to the National HIV/AIDS strategy. And sort of the direct support that we provide to that. So the AIDSVu images have been useful for increasing communities' awareness of the problem of HIV and leading more to direct action to prevent new infections. We've also had experiences in how AIDSVu can help users to locate HIV testing services or find other types of certain resources in their communities, getting more to the improving the care and treatment. And then the final step is in AIDSVu as a resource to identify the areas of populations that are most affected in trying to resolve HIV-related health disparities. And we have some examples in which cities and local jurisdictions have used the AIDSVu data in order to target additional services, particularly for those at most risk, which I think is really relevant to this discussion today. All right, so we're going to show you just really quickly what some of these maps look like and give you an orientation of this, but I'm going to spend most of the time looking at the maps when we get to the live site. So here is the overall map for the rates of persons living with HIV diagnoses by county. So this is the most current data from CDC, which is in 2010. We update all of our data from CDC every year when it becomes available from them. So we have the most current data that CDC has already released. And so this just shows where the darkest areas are the ones that are most heavily impacted. So increasing shades to red is at higher rates of HIV infection. And this is the map for Hispanic and Latino persons living with HIV. So the same data element as before, but now we actually have the capacity to look at just those cases among Latinos. And this is a rate as well. So this is the rate of prevalent HIV infection among Latinos living in each county. And you notice here that there's a lot of white compared to the overall map, and that's just really because of the protections that we're required to put into place to protect people's privacy. When we are dealing with either smaller numbers of total population or smaller numbers of cases, CDC is required by the state health departments to not give out that data. So that's why. So it's not that those counties are not impacted. The Latinos in those counties are not impacted. It's just that we're not able to show the data from CDC. So, and then this is a side-by-side looking at the rates of HIV infection for Hispanic and Latinos on the left and white persons on the right. And as you can see, where we have data in the counties, it's almost uniformly the rates in Hispanic and Latinos for every county are higher than what we see for the rates among white persons. So again, a really important image to think about when we're planning. Now, if we zoom down a little bit further, if you go to the next slide. So that, Eric, can you go to the next slide? One more. All right, so again, I'll show you how this interaction works on the site. The benefit with the slide deck, and so this is one of the slides that we have in our deck. The benefit with the slide deck is it allows us to see these maps side by side. You can see a little bit more detail than you can in the individual maps, but also allows us to compare the rate side by side for particular regions in the U.S. And this is obviously of importance for this call because of the focus on the Latinos in the Deep South. So again, if just the general impression that we have from this map is, again, every county in which we have data for both populations, the rate of HIV infection is higher among Hispanic and Latinos than it is among white. Next slide. All right, so also wanted to, as mentioned at the beginning of the call, that we have data available for multiple cities. So this data come directly from the city or state health departments. We have 20 cities right now in which we map all of this data at the zip code level. Those are the list on the left-hand side. We also have 3 cities that are participating right now in mapping the data at the census tract level, which are the small blocks, or the small collections of blocks that U.S. Census uses for population. And I'll show you examples of this when we get to the site as well. So for the zip code maps, this is the map for Hispanic and Latinos living in Atlanta. Again, the scale is very similar to the one we saw for the county map. So again, these are zip codes in Atlanta. This is the rate of HIV infection among Hispanic and Latino. The darker the colors, this time going to purple, means the higher the rate of infection among Latinos living in each of those zip codes. And so we also have, all this data for the different race ethnicities. So in comparison, the Hispanic and Latino one, that same map we saw on the left on the previous slide is on the left here. And then for comparison purposes, the rate of HIV infection among white persons in Atlanta for the same zip codes. And you can see when we get down into the level of the cities, the patterns that we were noticing for the South as a whole may not hold exactly true because we're dealing with cores of cities that have generally really high rates of HIV infection among all populations. But you can see that there are different patterns even in the city of Atlanta by zip code. Next slide. All right, so we know this is not part of the Deep South, but we also just wanted to show a highly impacted population. And again, this is a good example of this effect that we're seeing across multiple cities with the zip codes, where we have a core population within a city with very high rates of HIV infection and sort of concentric circles of reducing prevalence as you get further outside of the core of the city. So this is Fort Lauderdale. If you're familiar, that's the sort of downtown area of Fort Lauderdale, but it's a pretty big metro area. You can see high rates even out further into the more sort of agricultural, rural bordering areas in Fort Lauderdale. So this is the Hispanic and Latino map. The other one, just like Atlanta, is showing side by side. So Hispanic and Latino is on the left, and then white persons on the right. And you can see slightly different patterns here, but again, the same piece, which is that core of very high rates within cities. So again, the patterns are different when you look at different levels of data on AIDSVu. And again, this is not something that was really commonly available prior to AIDSVu going live. All right, next slide. So again, I just wanted to show you one other example. This is a much smaller metro area than either Fort Lauderdale or Atlanta. This is New Orleans, and looking again at the same population, so Hispanic and Latino, the rates of HIV infection in New Orleans. Again, sort of the downtown area of New Orleans with very high rates. It's the same scale that we have in the other cities. And if you look at the next map, so the pattern again is different here, where we see the rates among white persons, particularly in some of the outlying zip codes in New Orleans, are quite a bit higher than what we see for Hispanic and Latino persons. But again, still that core effect within the cities. Erica, just wanted to stop here real quick to see whether there are any questions of what I presented so far, and then maybe we'll switch over to the live site.
We have a question on the chat feature where we would like to know if it's possible to add resources for PrEP or non-exposure PrEP as part of the map.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're pursuing some additions this year, and that so every year we go through a process of putting in new functionality and refining what we already have, and putting down PrEP and NPEP resources similar to the treatment and testing locator is definitely on our list of things to consider for this year.
Great.
So in those times, so we have a function on the site as well, where if you have those suggestions, you could submit those to us, and we'll put those in for consideration for each of the updates we do.
Fantastic. Another question that we have is within the Latino population, are there any measures that will be able to help us distinguish the transgender Latinas, or are they viewed as MSMs on the site?
So yeah, so right now they're included as MSM on the site because we're using the CDC definitions. But I know that CDC is also working on updates to its surveillance case reporting that will allow better differentiation of persons who are transgender. And so I think as the CDC becomes more progressive in capturing that data, we'll be able to show that information on AIDSVu as well. But right now, we rely on the CDC definitions. That's a great question.
We have a question from the University of Buffalo. We're asking, looking at New Orleans and the prevalence rate, specifically white population, do you have social economic status numbers available?
Yeah, so that's a great segue. So maybe what we'll do is can we flip over to the website? Sure. And then I can show you some of the other functionality. We just didn't want to load up the slide deck with a bunch of additional things that we thought would be more useful to look at on the live site. So we flip over to the live one, and then we can show all the additional stuff we have on there.
Okay, just give me 1 moment. Okay, do you see the, let me see, do you see the,
yes,
the site? Okay, and then I'm just going to grant you controls. Okay, and you should be able to navigate the site now.
Great. So I'm just going to give you a quick tour of the AIDSVu site. This is the live site right now. This is the front page on the site. It has direct links out to a lot of the different content within AIDSVu. You can see the slider image that's coming across. It shows some additional content areas that are down within the site. But what I'm going to show you first is the interactive map. So we can go directly there from this link. Trying to see, so let's see if I can scroll down a little bit. Maybe get it bigger. All right. So this is that same map that we had the still image from for the slide deck, and you can see again this additional detail, but this is a fully interactive map that's similar to the other things that we interact with on the web. So we can drag and pan the map around. We can also zoom in or zoom out functionality. So again, a fully interactive map. If you didn't notice, as I was hovering as well, we get these little pop-up bubbles that actually have the exact rate of the infections in the counties. So not only do you get the sort of mosaic effect from looking at the color patterns, but you can get the data itself directly from the image that we're showing here. In addition, this is, I'm coping a little bit with the different screen size. Okay, all right, here we go. So also we have this full, look at this, it scrolled on me. Back up, there we go. All right, so the control panel is over here on the left-hand side. And this allows us to select different populations. So the maps that we were showing you before were those for Hispanic and Latino. Again, it just changes this interactive map in the very center, again, allowing us to be able to pan and move around and zoom down on the maps. In addition, we have the other demographic groups that we can look at. So if you're interested in looking at for instance, these rates by age group or different gender, we have those as well. We're working this year also on whether or not we'd be able to do any summary data for crosstabs. So for instance, if you want to look at Hispanic and Latino among age groups, we probably won't be able to map those at the county level, but we may be able to do cross tabs for those kinds of things either at the state level or in summary data. There was also a question about looking at other factors in addition to the HIV prevalence. So we have this functionality where we can look at the social determinants of health and do this side by side. Also, an additional function we're going to add this year is to be able to look at these different social determinants for subpopulations. But for instance, for right now, we can do this at the overall level. So here is the HIV prevalence map on the left-hand side, and this is the proportion who had a high school degree or more on the right-hand side. And again, very similar panning and scrolling function to what we have available in other web interactions where the maps are sort of locked together, so they pan, they zoom together. And so what we have seen with this ability and being able to look at this stuff side by side is the impact of HIV side by side with these sort of key social determinants of health. So here what we see is this, again, pattern of high HIV prevalence in the deep south with these dark burgundy colors for the high HIV infection rates. And again, a very similar pattern. This is the proportion of the population that's living in poverty, a similar pattern for those counties, those same counties in the deep south. All right, so I'm also going to show you data that we have available for cities. So the state data is here. On the left-hand side, we were down in the county data. I'm also going to show you cities. So again, this data comes from the state or city health departments. I'm going to show you the Atlanta maps and sort of the interactive nature of those. All right, there we go. So again, we already saw the overall Atlanta map. Again, just like for the main map, we can select populations for each of the different levels. So again, this is the Atlanta map for Hispanic and Latino. If I wanted to, I could also switch over. So you remember we mentioned that there were 3 cities that had census tracts as well, so I could switch over to census tracts here. Again, someone had brought up about the ability to look at social determinants at the city level. We can, again, do that side by side, but for this year, we can only do it for the overall. This is a new function for us, but the update that we're planning on later this year will actually be able to do side-by-side mapping as well for the different subpopulations of prevalence data. So I can show you the overall with the social determinant. Someone had an interest in that, and sort of how we see that data at the city level. So again, similar effect there in the core of the city, very high HIV prevalence and very high poverty levels in the center of the city. So I also wanted to show you New Orleans. I think someone had a specific question about New Orleans. And looking at the Hispanic and Latino map there. Again, the benefit with having this detailed data on New Orleans, so we, similar with the hover over function, we can get the exact data for the zip code from within the cities. And I was also going to show you the locator functionality. So this is the part of the locator where we can turn it on and lay it over the top of the map we're currently looking at. So here I'm going to turn on the HIV testing site. And we can see in that core part of the city there's 14 sites, so I can zoom in and get even more specific information. I can zoom in. We're dealing with a little bit of presentation lag. All right. Here we go. So again, this data populates at a very detailed level. So again, we're still looking at the rates of HIV infection among Hispanic and Latinos in New Orleans, and we can get the exact locations of the testing sites within the city. We can do the same thing if we wanted to for the treatment sites and if there are any of the clinical trials locations. Okay, so I was going to show you some of the additional resources that we have available as well on the site. So down here we have, under the Resources tab, we have downloadable information. So this includes the slide decks. So some of the information that we already showed you in the slide deck, those and even more information are available here in this part of the page. Go down. All right, so we have overall U.S. or national slide decks, so those are the county ones that we showed you. We also have a slide deck that's just devoted to HIV infection in the southeastern United States. And then each state actually has its own deck, and each of the cities have their own deck as well. So again, these are images that are available on the main site with the interactive site, but what we can do with the deck is we can put things side by side to show a little bit more contrast and comparison. This page is also the location where we have available the data that sits behind a lot of the mapping that we do. So we have the data up on the site from the CDC for both the state and the county map. So all of that information, including the social determinants of health, those are all in here in Excel files. for download, and people can use them for their own purposes, for their own projects. In addition, we have several cities that have agreed to provide their city data as well. So you can see here's the collection of cities that have also allowed us to post up the zip code data sets for the cities, and these also include the social determinants of health at the zip code level. All right, so are there any questions about this site? And then I was going to show you a brand new, hot off the presses site, the HIV Continuum site, afterwards.
Maybe if you could go to the HIV Continuum site, because we don't have the chat feature available while you're on this.
Okay. Yep. Absolutely. All right, so this is HIV Continuum. This is actually an offshoot of AIDSVu, and the reason why we created a separate site for it is actually the source of the data and the concept around HIV Continuum is a little bit different than the main AIDSVu site. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to map the different steps in the HIV Continuum. So these are the steps that have been part of the continuum, looking at the pathway from diagnosis all the way through viral suppression. So we look at mapping at the zip code or the neighborhood level, new HIV diagnoses, and then the proportion of those who are diagnosed late, and then the proportion of those diagnosed who are linked, who are engaged, continually be engaged in care, and then those who have a suppressed HIV viral load. And there's a couple different ways that we look at that one. So again, the whole concept around HIV Continuum was because we did all this mapping with AIDSVu, and we know that HIV prevalence is not equally distributed inside these cities. The assumption can also be that that maybe HIV care is not equally distributed within the cities and for different populations within the cities. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to get these data to apply them to this mapping concept. And so we've used definitions. So that if you guys are familiar with this field, the definitions are also changing, but we use definitions that were already sort of standardized in literature for each of these different indicators. And all of this data comes from the HIV surveillance offices and their ability to track the laboratory data for their HIV positive persons in their jurisdictions. So this is all diagnosis and laboratory surveillance data from the local health departments. So I'll show you what this looks like for a map, and you'll see why we had to create an entirely different interface for it. Because it'll go back home. Go home. There we go. All right. So I'm going to show you Atlanta. So if you can imagine with AIDSVu, I didn't show so AIDSVu, there's two types of data. We have the prevalent HIV infection, which means everyone is currently alive with the disease, and we also have some new data about new HIV diagnosis. But you can imagine for HIV Continuum, we not only have those new HIV diagnoses, but we have 5 or 6 more indicators, and so those become actually very complex in the interface. And so what we did was we created this tiled approach in which the indicators could be selected in this interface over here on the left-hand side, and then we could select the subpopulations from the tiles. The other advantage is that this allows you for any indicator to sort of see the overall impact across different populations. So for instance, this is, see if I can get it down one more click. So for instance, this is HIV diagnosis in the center overall, but you could also see HIV diagnosis among Black persons, white persons, and Hispanic persons. And if I click on any one of these thumbnail images, it actually makes that the main image in the center. So again, a little bit different color scheme, but the colors still have the same. Let's see if I can get it a little centered better. So the color scheme still has the same meaning as on the main AIDSVu site, which is the darker colors mean the higher rate. So you can see, again, these are data at the zip code level for HIV diagnoses. And these are the 5-year risk of a new HIV diagnosis per 100,000 Hispanic or Latinos living in each of the zip codes. You can see how the patterns of disease show up a little bit differently for populations. In addition, we can cycle through the different indicators. So these are diagnoses. We could also look at linkage to care. Again, this is for Hispanic and Latino, so we keep this population the same. So these are the proportion of Hispanic and Latinos that were linked to care. Again, we've sort of framed the indicators so that way the darker colors are the worst outcomes. So the lighter colors are the higher proportion linked to care, the darker color are the lower proportion linked to care. And again, we have all of the other indicators as well. So if we wanted to look at sort of that penultimate part of the HIV care continuum, which is the suppressed HIV virus among those who are diagnosed with HIV, you can see the proportions here. In addition, just like with the main AIDSVu site, we actually have the ability to pull the data up for each of these spots. Let's see if it'll do it on the presentation mode. No. No. So we can also expand out these maps. So it may show up better on there. No, it's not going to expand either. All right. So normally what we would be able to do is instead of a hover function, we would be able to click on here. It would give us that little balloon that pops up that would give us the exact proportion of Hispanic and Latinos living in the zip code with HIV who had a suppressed virus. All right. So the other thing, as you can imagine, when you look across all of this data, that becomes a little bit difficult to sort of understanding what the overall pattern is, particularly across different populations and different indicators. And so we came up with a way, again, of summarize. So AIDSVu has two approaches. One is providing exceptional amount of detail that can be useful for local planning and understanding local context. But the other is sort of taking that information and summarizing it in a way that can be useful. And so, so we have this other functionality here, which is actually to look at this grid, which puts all the indicators and all the subpopulations into this color format. So again, the scale is the darker color is the worst outcome. The lighter color are the better outcomes. So you can see across multiple populations sort of how they fare against one another. So this is the race ethnicity for Black, White, and Latino diagnoses. And you can see sort of everyone in the city of Atlanta fares about the same for late diagnosis and maybe linkage to care, but Black and Hispanic persons actually fare worse than white persons for continual engagement in care. And then I just make one point. So this is suppressed HIV viral load, and this is among those who are still in care. And so what this means is, I didn't point out in the other one, so what this means for Hispanic and Latino, if they get in care and stay in care, their outcomes for suppressed virus are good relative to the other populations. But where there may be a problem in Atlanta is actually for Hispanic and Latino persons staying in care. All right, so there's a lot more data on HIV continuum to explore. There's also a slide deck for each city, which is this function up here. So for each city, we have just some basic images that we thought would be useful, particularly side-by-side things, and just sort of general, or actually we don't have side-by-side, but just general pieces of information to be able to pull directly into a slide deck instead of having to do screen captures. but really exploring the data in detail is what we had intended for HIV Continuum. All right, so Eric, I don't know if we want to open the call while we have the live, if we want to open the call up to questions for the live site, or do we want to?
We have some
mostly about caveats and things like that. So I think maybe
we have
open up the
some questions. Yeah. So one of the questions that we have is what entity will be maintaining or updating the site? So who maintains and updates this site, I think is what he wants to know. And how often is it updated?
Yeah, so Emory University maintains the site, and we do a major update on AIDSVu in the summer in June as the new HIV or the new CDC HIV data is released. And so the update goes up usually on that day for National HIV Testing Day. In addition, we're constantly making smaller updates and changes to the site throughout the year. So we'll add some additional functionality or add like profile pages, things like that, to the main AIDSVu site. For HIV Continuum, the update cycle is probably going to be different than it is for the main site, and the reason why is that we actually have more flexibility with that because we're working directly with the state and local health department. So the plan for that is to probably expand to the number of cities sometime this spring and hopefully add those extra cities in over the summer. But those will be rolling updates. So as we expand the cities and we get the new data from the new cities, we'll probably also go back this summer and get data from the 3 existing cities from Philly, Atlanta, and DC. And so those will be on a rolling update, probably again, maybe once or twice a year with the most current data that the city health departments, the state health departments have for each of the cities that will be part of Continuum.
Thank you. So we have another question coming in. Do you have plans to include statewide data in the HIV Continuum site?
Yes. So we're not sure yet which site it will live on, whether it will be on the Continuum site or on AIDSVu, but we do have an interest in testing out mapping the HIV Continuum data probably for a few cities, few states, and potentially looking at either regions like health districts in a state or maybe even down at the county level. The difficulty in producing an overall national map similar to what we have for AIDSVu for the Continuum, even at the state level, is that not all states are sort of on equal footing with their ability to do the tracking of all the laboratory reports that are required to do this detailed map. So, so probably we would start with maybe a few pilot cities this year that would want to do something more with their state data. Keep saying cities, but it's pilot states that would do something more with their state data.
Thank you. So the care and HIV prevention projects in the U.S., known as CAPAS, which are demonstration sites throughout the South, do they come with new reporting requirements that we would be able to see on the site in the future?
So I'm not exactly sure what it's referring to. We actually work really closely with the surveillance office for Atlanta, and they're also a CAPAS site. And part of our advisory committee, or one of the members on our advisory committee, is actually the surveillance person from Louisiana, which is one of the other main CAPAS sites for New Orleans. I know CAPAS, so I don't know if this is in regards to the Continuum. The CAPAS sites are actually required as part of their grant mechanism to look at Continuum outcomes within their jurisdictions. and some of them are also doing mapping. And so we've been having discussions with New Orleans and Atlanta about how the mapping for CAPAS matches up with what we're doing for Continuum. But I do also know that, so I think, is the question also about other data sources that CAPAS is exploring?
Yes, exactly. Are there any other data sources that we could seek, that we could look forward to coming out in the future from the CAPAS grants?
So we haven't made that specific connection, but it's a great suggestion that we do about other data sources that they're looking at. One of the things that we're considering this year that's related to that is actually looking at data from other surveillance systems. So there's a behavioral surveillance system for a lot of these highly impacted cities, including the CAPAS cities, and also a clinical outcomes monitoring system. And so we have connections. Those are managed out of CDC, and they're implemented within the cities. And so that's on our list as well to pursue this year to potentially get that additional data and see what we can do with it, maybe in some pilot cities. But that's a great suggestion to think about it for CAPAS, because I know that they're probably looking at that data as well for the local planning.
Great. We have two questions that came in that are very similar, and they're looking at, what they're asking about is if you're able to pull data based on variable immigration status.
So we don't get that data from CDC. So CDC has that data available on, So I know CDC collects that data on their case report forms, but it's not something that we captured before.
Thank you again. If there's anybody who would like to ask questions, please do so on the chat feature. We're keeping the lines muted because we have a lot of people on the line, and we want to be able to keep the background noise to a minimum. So please, if you have any questions, please do so. For Dr. Sanchez, please do so on the chat feature. A question that I have is, something somewhat similar to that. Will the Affordable Care Act be able to help us understand a little bit more about access to insurance and access to medical care? Is that something that we'll know about through this tool as to amount of folks who are insured or covered, or those who are not?
So the data that we use, the social determinants of health are mapped. For one of those indicators is the lack of health insurance, and that data is all derived from the U.S. Census Office, and so those data are updated as part of their inter-census estimates, and I'm not sure. So some of those are projections based off of the American Community Surveys that are done sort of in the inter-census years, and I'm not sure what the ultimate impact will be, but we do get that data new every year, and so if there's a change within the census tracking that information based on the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, then we'll also be able to pick it up and map it on AIDSVu.
Thank you. We're going to move to the next slide. Do we have other resources?
Yep. Yeah, so we also just wanted to point out again, so CDC also has their own site for mapping, which is the NCHH-STP Atlas, and so that is also available and very useful, and a detailed tool to get at the state and county level data as well. And the benefit is you can also get other data on viral hepatitis, STDs, and TB in addition on that site. Also, as we had mentioned, that we provide a lot of summary information on our state profile pages. I didn't go into all the different components on there, but we have information about different prevention resources within the states. But we also have links here directly to the CDC site for how you can access other types of prevention services. And in addition, particularly for our awareness day pages, we rely a lot on the very detailed and useful information that's put out by the Kaiser Family Foundation for a lot of our awareness day page information. And so that is a link directly to the Kaiser Family Foundation website for that information.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Sanchez, for a really informative presentation on this wonderful tool. It's really a privilege to be able to share this with our friends and colleagues throughout the South working with Latinos on Latino health issues. So thank you very much for your time and your explanation of your sites.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're welcome to do this. And I think that I said this multiple times already, but all of this information is freely available. It's out there for you guys to use it. Use it well, use it widely, and just let us know if there's anything there that you need, maybe a different image or a higher resolution image, or if you need some different view or side-by-side view or anything like that, just please let us know, because any way that we can put this data to use is exactly what we want AIDSVu out there for. In addition, if you do use it for anything and you have a good story about how this is useful for planning or changing the discussion about HIV in your areas, you can also let us know just with a quick email to any of these contacts here, because the other thing we do is we can keep AIDSVu going even stronger and get better ideas if we know how it's been most useful out in the community. And so those stories end up becoming very powerful lessons for us for the site.
Thank you. So yes, anybody who's using this site, please share your stories. This is how we get this is how we contextualize a lot of our information. So thank you for that. One more question that we have just coming in is is there a tool to gauge the cost of HIV meds per city?
Not that I'm currently aware of. What we do have, I didn't show it on the state profile pages. There's different tabs, and we actually have for each of the states how much federal funding the state receives for care and prevention treatment. And so that's sort of the marker for federal funding at the state level. But I'm not aware of any mapping ability for funding at smaller geographic areas. Thank
you.
If anyone's aware of that, I'm always looking for new sources of data, so please let me know. I've been trying to get data out of Walgreens, but it hasn't been very successful.
Once again, thank you again. This is wonderful, and for those of us who are working with Latino health issues in the South, this webinar series is for you. This is to be able to help you develop the tools and information that you need. Following this presentation, you'll have an evaluation form. Please let us know what you would like to know about in the future, what other subjects we could be presenting for you that will help your work with health in Latinos in the South. And finally, I want to urge all of you to go to we are conducting another regional assessment, a follow-up to our 2008 regional assessment, which started the Latinos in the Deep South program. And we urge you to lend your voice to it. It's at surveymonkey.com/S/DeepSouth2014. You can also contact myself or Judith Montenegro at evalera@latinoaids.org or jmontenegro at latinoaids.org. Once again, I want to thank our friends at Emory University, and especially Dr. Sanchez for his time in participating with us and being able to demonstrate this tool. We hope to hear from all of you very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.